On this Monday night, the unprecedented dependency on Canadian food banks.
We are struggling to keep up with that demand.
How charities are serving up new ways to ease growing hunger pains. COVID-19's unwelcome comeback in New Brunswick.
Not the Thanksgiving we would have hoped for.
The new surge spawning new rules. Armenia versus Azerbaijan. A failed ceasefire, the fighting and the finger pointing. And Lucky Duckie, the Canadian sleuth who saved the day of actor John Cryer.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Sophie Louie.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. As Canadians sit down for Thanksgiving dinner this evening, there are many families turning to food banks to put a meal on the table. The everyday need for help is growing, with food insecurity in this country rising dramatically since the start of the COVID-19 crisis. Before the pandemic, more than 840,000 Canadians relied on food banks across this country. Now, some are reporting a 25 to 50% increase in demand, even higher in some places. The federal government has allocated $100 million to the Emergency Food Security Fund. As Jeff Semple reports, some organizations are going to great lengths to meet the growing need for food.
For Canadian charities, this is an annual tradition. Preparing Thanksgiving dinner for the poor and vulnerable. And this year, the demand is daunting.
In Canada, we've never seen food insecurity to the heights that it is currently. And certainly a lot of that is caused by the pandemic.
We're seeing a lot of new faces.
Toronto's Daily Bread Food Bank has seen its clientele climb by more than 200%.
At no time has the need for food banks been more pressing, and we are struggling to keep up with that demand.
To meet the moment, some are reconnecting with their roots. This Alberta lawyer had never grown anything before, but his property is vast, and when the pandemic hit, he decided to get his hands dirty.
The demand for food at the food bank was astronomically high, and it was like a light bulb went off for me.
A seed of an idea quickly sprouted into the pandemic planting project. Volunteers planting veggies and picking 90,000 pounds of potatoes, donated to those in need.
And the pandemic also presents another unique challenge: how to deliver all of this desperately needed food and supplies safely.
To that end, for the first time in its history, the food bank is hosting a food drive-through. Long lines of cars looking to contribute, while others are skipping the traffic altogether, deploying donations by drone.
So for the first time ever in Canada, we've launched a humanitarian cargo drone mission.
The charity Global Medic typically responds to disasters overseas, but they're now redeploying that help at home. Flying food, along with soap and masks, to remote Indigenous communities.
During COVID, there are a lot of restrictions on travel. We have challenges all the time, especially in the winter months, getting supply to the communities.
For the many missing out this long weekend, Canadians are finding creative ways to bring Thanksgiving to them. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
It's the first day to apply for the Canada Recovery Benefit, one of the replacements for the CERB. The $500 a week support benefit is for people who are missing work due to the pandemic but aren't eligible for employment insurance. Many who logged on to the Canada Revenue Agency website earlier today to apply for the benefit reported technical difficulties, but the CRA says those issues have been resolved. Those who are approved for the benefit can access it for up to 26 weeks. As for daily case counts, a number of provinces didn't report today due to the holiday, but here's what we can tell you. There were 843 new infections reported in Quebec today. Manitoba reported 77 new cases, and there were 48 in Saskatchewan. In Atlantic Canada, there was 1 new case in Newfoundland and Labrador. Nova Scotia reported 0, and there were 6 new cases in New Brunswick. Those newly confirmed infections in New Brunswick bring to 76 the total number of active infections there. That's a big caseload for a province that for months had very few cases. As Ross Lord reports, it's a reminder for people everywhere, now is not the time to be complacent.
What's happening in New Brunswick shows just how quickly COVID-19 can spread.
Barely a week ago, there were 3 active cases in this province.
Now there are 76 active cases, roughly half of them at this long-term care home in Moncton. 5 people are in hospital, 1 in intensive care.
We've been privileged here in New Brunswick to have had some of our closest contacts with the disease for a long time, being fear and a bit of anxiety when we see an out-of-province license plate. But now the disease is here in our province and active.
In the viral hot zones, new province-wide rules mandating masks in indoor public spaces are being expanded to include the outdoors. The government is urging people not to travel to the outbreak zones, and it's telling residents who live there to stay home if possible. The outbreaks, which include several schools, have forced many New Brunswickers to scrap their travel plans for Thanksgiving weekend.
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. Joyeux Action de Grâce. Not the Thanksgiving we would have hoped for, but still a lot to be thankful for.
The other 3 Atlantic provinces are still reporting few, if any, new cases, including Nova Scotia, whose land border with New Brunswick remains open and has not followed the other Atlantic provinces in applying special travel guidelines to its residents. But the spirit of harmony inside the so-called Atlantic bubble is in danger of being knocked out of tune.
People's antenna are up in relation to New Brunswick residents, and we're, cautiously waiting to see what happens.
The next 14 days will be critical in terms of how we see things unfolding here.
A new level of anxiety in a region that had been relatively unscathed. Ross Lord, Global News.
In Manitoba, most of the people dealing with COVID-19 are in the Winnipeg area, but the virus has been detected in some remote First Nations communities too. One of them is Little Grand Rapids First Nation near the Northern Ontario border. According to the First Nation, more than 30 people have tested positive. Over the weekend, the Canadian Red Cross flew into the community to help with infection control and PPE training. The Red Cross also went to York Factory First Nation to help with logistics and PPE training. In Ontario, an outbreak has been declared at Western University after 4 people at the same student residence tested positive. The university says the outbreak occurred at London Hall. The affected people are now in self-isolation and contact tracing is underway. To Europe now, governments are struggling with how best to get a hold of the second wave of this pandemic. In places like the UK, France, and Spain, case numbers are skyrocketing and hospital beds are filling up. But the World Health Organization is urging countries to do everything they can to avoid sweeping lockdowns.
We want to try and avoid, and sometimes it's unavoidable. We accept that. But what we want to try and avoid are these massive lockdowns that are so punishing to communities, to society, and to everything else.
Now, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he doesn't want another national lockdown. But with case numbers spiking in England, he's unveiled a new plan for targeted restrictions to help get the situation under control. The 3-level alert system will mean tougher measures for harder hit regions. Crystal Goomansingh has more on how it'll all work.
The UK has more COVID-19 patients in hospital now than when Britain entered its national lockdown back in March. With hospital beds filling up, 3 overflow facilities are now on standby.
These figures are flashing at us like dashboard warnings in a passenger jet, and we must act now.
The North is leading the country in infections, but they are rising fast across the UK. England is now being divided into a 3-tier alert system. Under medium, groups are restricted to 6 people. Pubs and bars must close at 10. Most of England will be moving to the high level, which adds a ban on household indoor mixing. Under very high, pubs and bars are closed, and people are asked to limit their travel.
Areas within the very high alert category will be reviewed every 4 weeks.
Liverpool City Centre will be the first to enter that very high alert level Wednesday. That means pubs and bars will have to shut down. The hospitality sector has said it is being unfairly targeted by the government. The Nighttime Industries Association is even considering legal action against the government.
There are no plans at the moment to close schools, but universities have seen large outbreaks. Earlier this month, Northumbria University reported 770 infections. Manchester University had 127 cases in September. The majority of infections had been in the 16 to 29-year-old population, but older individuals are starting to fall ill.
The elderly suffer a much worse course with COVID-19. They are admitted to hospital for longer periods, and they are more difficult to save.
The Prime Minister says the months ahead will test the country, but he is confident it will succeed. Crystal Goomansingh, Global News, London.
In the U.S., despite the pandemic and infections on the Senate Judiciary Committee, the confirmation hearing began today into President Trump's top pick to fill the Supreme Court seat of late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Judge Amy Coney Barrett is a staunch supporter of the religious right and will solidify a 6-3 conservative majority on the 9-member court. That's why Republicans want her confirmed before the November 3rd election and why Democrats are determined to stop it. In her opening statement, Amy Coney Barrett said she will stick to the Constitution.
But courts are not designed to solve every problem or right every wrong in our public life. When the president offered me this nomination, I was deeply honored. I chose to accept the nomination because I believe deeply in the rule of law and the place of the Supreme Court in our nation.
Tomorrow, both sides will have the chance to ask Amy Coney Barrett questions about whether or not she is the right candidate for the Supreme Court. Democrats warn the former law professor will strip away critical health benefits if successful, including Obamacare. Still in the U.S., President Trump is back on the campaign trail, gearing up for more crowded campaign rallies. Late today, Trump's physician revealed he has tested negative for COVID-19 on consecutive days. And Trump is once again being slammed by America's top infectious disease expert over a new campaign ad. Dr. Anthony Fauci says he's been taken out of context to heap praise on the president. Jennifer Johnson reports.
After repeating misleading information about his health, U.S. President Donald Trump is back campaigning, telling advisors to get him on the road every single day until Election Day. Rallies are planned this week in Florida, Pennsylvania, Iowa, and North Carolina.
I've been tested totally negative.
7 days after returning to the White House after being hospitalized for COVID-19, the White House has finally released a memo from the president's physician saying he has tested negative on consecutive days. But medical experts question that.
It's very difficult to know if someone is infectious or not with the current tests. We still need better and more appropriate testing in the country.
On Twitter, Trump claimed, "I can't get it, immune, and can't give it." But Twitter took the tweet down, saying it had misleading and potentially harmful information. This, as a new ad put out by the Trump campaign, is drawing fire from the nation's top infectious disease expert, Dr. Anthony Fauci.
President Trump tackled the virus head-on, as leaders should.
I can't imagine that anybody could be doing more.
Dr. Fauci says that comment made 7 months ago was about the government's response to the pandemic, not the president's. Dr. Fauci writing, "They did this without my permission, and my comments were taken out of context. In my 5 decades of public service, I have never publicly endorsed, nor do I now endorse any political candidates." The pandemic is showing a resurgence across the U.S., with 36 states reporting an increase in new cases and several breaking records. Hospitalizations are spiking too.
His reckless personal conduct since his diagnosis has been unconscionable. The longer Donald Trump is president, the more reckless he seems to get.
Rising cases and deaths of COVID-19 now at the forefront of the presidential campaign, with the election just 3 weeks away. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
A ceasefire crumbles almost immediately after it begins. Coming up, why concern is growing over conflict in the Caucasus. Plus, the BC man who answered actor John Cryer's cry for help.
There you go.
China is denying that 2 Canadians held for almost 2 years have been arbitrarily detained in response to the arrest of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. Its foreign ministry spokesperson says China firmly opposes the erroneous statements made by Canada and reiterated its claim that Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor are suspected of endangering China's national security. The 2 Michaels were both granted consular access in recent days, the first time since January. Kovrig's wife told the CBC he was relieved to get outside news and shocked to learn about the scale of the coronavirus pandemic. A ceasefire between Armenia and Azerbaijan didn't last long, both sides accusing the other of breaking the truce almost as soon as it began over the weekend. Hundreds of soldiers and civilians have died in the fighting over the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. And as Redmond Shannon reports, there are now fears the conflict could escalate and draw in regional powers like Turkey and Russia.
Orphaned by war, these Azerbaijani siblings lead a funeral procession for their parents. They were among 9 people killed, according to Azerbaijan, by Armenian bombing, coming shortly after a ceasefire brokered by Russia over the weekend.
What we see here is just Armenia's purpose to kill civilians. Once again, shows a true face of Armenia.
Armenia says the accusation it targeted civilians is an absolute lie.
The problem might be that Azerbaijan very often resorts to, well, they choose to locate their military positions in close to residential areas. I don't know, but we never target a peaceful population.
Armenia says it was Azerbaijan, backed by Turkish military support, that broke the ceasefire minutes after it came into effect.
And if Turkey previously has been a kind of behind-the-scene player in Azerbaijan's domestic and foreign policy, now they're really hands-on.
Turkey has denied numerous reports it's recruited Syrian mercenaries to fight alongside Azerbaijani forces. Nagorno-Karabakh is part of an Armenian-controlled region which is internationally recognised as part of Azerbaijan. After the two countries became independent, war in the 1990s killed tens of thousands of people until a delicate truce was reached. Analysts believe years of neglect by foreign powers who oversaw the deal have led to the renewed hostilities. Armenia's foreign minister was in Moscow to meet his Russian counterpart on Monday. He also pointed to a lack of independent monitoring of the region. Russia's foreign minister dismissed calls for Turkey to be more involved in brokering a peace deal. Last week, Canada suspended some arms exports to Turkey over allegations equipment was being passed on to Azerbaijani forces. Canadian Foreign Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne is in Europe this week and will discuss the conflict with NATO and EU leaders. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Still ahead, how an adoption agency's financial fumbles cost the dreams of some prospective parents. Adopting a child comes with many hurdles: security checks, parenting courses, a huge financial cost, and there are no guarantees. A number of BC families found that out the hard way, paying thousands to an agency they had assumed was being overseen by the provincial government. But it suddenly shut down in 2019. And as Robin Gill reports, one prospective parent's detective work uncovered problems that went back years.
There are children in this world who need a home, and there are families like Corey Bell and her husband who want to adopt.
I have no specific desire to have biological children, so I always thought I'd do it.
The 38-year-old turned to Choices Adoption, a Victoria charity. She spent $12,000 to have social workers interview her and take courses on taking on a child that isn't hers biologically. Then the agency suddenly closed last year with no recourse for Bell, who was among 90 families left in the lurch.
It has been very devastating. I mean, it's a hard enough thing adopting. It's a lot. You do background checks and classes and you wait. But to feel like you haven't been supported by your government, like you've been abandoned by a charity organization, it's devastating.
Before Choices shut down, it asked and got $90,000 from the province to pay its debts. Bell uncovered documents she feels should have been red flags and filed a complaint with the provincial ombudsperson.
The financial documents that we got a hold of do show a lot of very unnecessary travel, a lot of very expensive coffees. There was a very fancy 25th anniversary party that was paid for by adoptive parents, not by the government, not by charity donations. It was paid for by me.
But there was never an audit of any of these expenses.
When the troubles of this adoption agency became apparent, the ministry in charge of adoptions in this province said it would step in. But it's been close to a year, and the families are still waiting.
BC is in the midst of a provincial election, so no one from the government will comment. Some families turned to Victoria Police to file a complaint citing financial mismanagement and fraud. The police department couldn't confirm if there's an investigation. The families were told they could have their files transferred to 2 other agencies that still operate in British Columbia.
I would still love to adopt, but I don't see how it's possible in this scheme. I can't just keep throwing money down a hole.
But it means starting all over again, and the emotional burden has already been too much. Robin Gill, Global News, Victoria.
Up next, why a Vancouver man is now king of the ring in the eyes of a Hollywood star. American actor Jon Cryer has something pretty special to be grateful for this Canadian Thanksgiving. The star, known for his role in the sitcom 2.5 Men, is working in Vancouver. He was walking along the city's seawall when he dropped his wedding ring. After a futile search, he called in a local man who helps people recover lost jewelry. And then this happened.
How does this feel?
Oh no. Oh, you're kidding me.
There you go.
That is beautiful, man. That is absolutely beautiful.
Wow.
Thank you. That is the one. Now wait, we have to check it. Like
I have no doubt.
Boom.
Cryer took to Twitter with his story in a lengthy post that's been shared nearly 10,000 times. He gave thanks to this guy, saying, "I am still beside myself. This is Chris. He is awesome."
I got lucky. Probably 3 minutes into the search, I found it in the middle of the grass in a 3-foot area. His reaction was like most people's, kind of disbelief, and shock and surprise, and he was happy.
And that's Global National for this Monday. I'm Sophie Louie. We leave you tonight with a heartfelt tribute to a beloved hockey coach. Darcy Hogan was head coach of the Humboldt Broncos. He was killed in the 2018 bus crash that also took the lives of 15 others. Now he's being honored with a new bronze statue in his hometown of Peace River, Alberta. Thanks for watching and have a great night. Happy Thanksgiving.